Parshas Matos-Masei. This week's Parsha, the very end, contains a verse that, without the context, makes it difficult to understand. I'm referring to Perek Lamed Hey, Pasuk Lamed Gimel. That's 35-33. The verse reads as follows. Velo sachanifu es haaretz. Don't, now this is a problematic term, sachanifu, because typically chanifa means flattery. Doesn't seem to fit here, but let's use the word just to emphasize the difficulty. Don't flatter the land. Asher atem ba, that you are, collectively, you're in, plural. Ki adam hu yachanif es haaretz, because the blood will, again, flatter the land. V'lo aretz lo yichupar l'adam asher shupach ba ki im bedam shovcho. And the land will not be cleansed or atoned for the blood that has been spilled on it, except for the blood of he who spilled it. Now, in order to understand what this verse means, we're going to need to look at the context. The context begins a few verses earlier, and that is, I would say, with verse 30, with Pasuk Lamed. The verse reads as follows: Kol ma'kenefesh lefi edim yitzach rotzeach. Anyone who kills another in front of witnesses, the murderer must be put to death. But it is insufficient to have only one witness. It must be a minimum of two. Now, verse 31, Lamed Aleph. Don't accept ransom or a payoff for the life of a murderer who is worthy of death. Kimosi must, but rather he must be put to death. He must die. Now, 32. And for someone who kills inadvertently, one who kills another inadvertently, so he's not put to death, but rather he is exiled in one of the cities of refuge. And he is entitled to return after the Kohen Gadol dies. And then we have our problematic verse, and don't, again, we're going to use the typical translation of don't flatter the land that you're in, because the blood will cause the land to be flattered. It's very difficult to understand. And the land will not be atoned except by the spilling of the blood of the one who killed. So first of all, clearly, it doesn't actually mean flatter here, although there's probably some similarity. So what is lo sachanifu? So Rashi says, lo sachanifu lo tarshiu. Don't make evil, don't make guilty the land. Okay, so presumably what this means is that if a person deliberately kills another, and the conditions for imposing the death penalty are present, that is, that they're two witnesses, they're kosher witnesses, they quote, they give an hasra, they quote from the verse in the Torah that explicitly prohibits the action, in this case, murder, and the suspect says, Afal pichin, he knowingly says, I hear you, and even though there's a prohibition, I'm going to do it. In that case, roughly speaking, the conditions for imposing the death penalty are fulfilled, and he can't buy his way out. Evidently, that is, it may even be, in some societies, an official way. You either die or you pay a huge amount of money. And the Torah is saying, and we're not talking about necessarily about bribery, it could include bribery. What the Torah is saying is that the penalty must be administered, whether it's a deliberate murder or an inadvertent homicide, manslaughter. The penalty must be paid. That penalty is either by capital punishment or it's with exile. Why, if Rashi is correct, that it means don't cause it to be evil, why doesn't it just say, lo tarshiu es haaretz asher atem ba? So don't cause the land to be evil, which is what Rashi says, v'lo tarshiu. There is something about the word sachanifu that gives us additional meaning and additional understanding. The Mefarshim point out, several of them, in somewhat different ways, that chanifa, flattery, is saying one thing, but actually having in mind something else. You tell somebody, oh, you're so smart, and you think they're not so smart, but you think that flattering them is going to get you somewhere. You're going to get some benefit from it. The benefit may just be making the other person feel good and establishing a better relationship, maybe something slightly more nefarious. Flatter a person so that he'll favor you for a deal. Flatter a person so that they'll let you do something that you're otherwise not supposed to do. There are all kinds of reasons to be chad b'peh v'chad b'leiv, duplicitous, two-faced, speak with forked tongue. There's the notion is that it's not emes, it's not consistent. And what the Torah is saying is, if a person, chas v'shalom, takes the life of another person wrongfully, whether it's deliberate or it's inadvertent, there must be an appropriate, commensurate punishment. And if there isn't, if a person has the option of buying himself out, that is chanifa, that is appearing to do justice, but not doing justice. And that leads to bad things. What kind of bad things does it lead to? So some of Hirsch refer to when the Torah some of Hirsch explain that when it says ki adam hu yachanifes haaretz, that the blood will cause the land itself to be, we're going to use the term now, duplicitous. What it's referring to is the land looks beautiful and looks capable of producing bounty, and it ends up producing nothing. So there's an intimate relationship between the spirituality of Bnei Israel, of the children of Israel, and the production of the land. In fact, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that when the land produces its fruits bountifully, after years, decades, millennia of lying fallow or being swampland or rocks incapable of producing anything edible or anything edible in meaningful quantities, then along comes the times of the redemption. As a lead up to the times of redemption, there's an ingathering of the Jews, and the land starts producing its fruit. This, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, this is the most obvious sign of the coming redemption. That's according to one explanation. Another explanation is that the reference to the land is not to the actual dirt, but it's to the inhabitants of the land, the culture of the land, the people of the land, that allowing a murderer to get off simply by paying some amount, buying himself off, rather than paying the price that normally would be exacted from this kind of perpetrator, that leads to corruption. That leads to a society that claims to be moral and is actually profoundly immoral. I'm reminded of an observation by one of the Balei Musar, who talked about how proper and dignified and polite were the Germans of the time of the Holocaust. But that didn't prevent them from murderous activities. And it's a little bit confusing and confounding, as duplicitousness frequently is, because things aren't always as they appear to be. And what the Torah is saying is that the land demands transparency. The land demands justice. The land, whether it's the actual physical land or whether it's talking about the society, that the goal is to produce a society of scrupulous behavior, scrupulously honest and a proper behavior. And when somebody steps out of line, which happens even in the most proper and benign of societies, then the punishment, the appropriate punishment must be administered. The appropriate consequences must be felt. Otherwise, it leads to a corruption, whether it's a corruption in the production of the land, when we emphasize the spiritual relationship of the land to the people, or corruption in the culture of the people. The goal, justice. Justice for everyone, and an appropriate, measured response without loopholes for people who are either in positions of power or wealthy. Have a good Shabbos.